So the Nintendo Switch 2 trailer has been out for a while now, and some people have already got their impressions on this next gen console for Nintendo. Now, I'm going to be honest, I've been wanting to talk about this subject for a little while, but I kind of held off on this subject because I wanted to try to keep things spoiler free for myself as much as possible. So I've been trying to avoid the internet in terms of like spoilers for the Switch 2. So for this video, I wanted to go over the Nintendo Switch 2 trailer and break it down as best as I can. And I want to give my thoughts and opinions on what I personally think the Switch 2 is going to be. And will the Switch 2 be good or will the Switch 2 just be bad? So I kind of want to talk about that for today's video and give my thoughts and opinions on that. So with this out of the way, let's get on with the topic of today's video. So I'm going to show you the trailer. I'm going to give you my thoughts and opinions on it as we go along. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So it looks like the Switch 2 is going to have a kickstand that looks a bit smaller compared to the OLEDs. And if we look at the controllers here, it looks like that the controller is slightly bigger and it looks like the buttons are bigger, the buttons on like the side of the controller look bigger too. And if we look at the Joy-Con, it looks like it has some kind of I guess protection and the buttons are much bigger on the side of the controller. And if we look at like the console itself on how you put in the controllers, it looks like you can just snap it on. And also it looks like we have the next Mario Kart game revealed for the Nintendo Switch 2. Okay, so let's talk about this because there's a lot to uncover in this little trailer for the Switch 2. So the first one I want to talk about is the Joy-Cons, okay? I mean, I think we can all agree when it comes to playing video games. I mean, on the original Nintendo Switch at least, the Joy-Cons were just awful. I mean, let's call it for what it is. I mean, the Joy-Cons on the original Nintendo Switch had a lot of stick drift. I mean, I was a victim of stick drift as well, and I was thinking to myself, okay, well, if I know for a fact that these Joy-Con controllers are going to be terrible, I'll just get myself a Pro controller and save myself the hassle. Because that's how I've spent the majority of my time playing the Nintendo Switch. I just play mostly with the Pro controller. I think the only time I ever use like a Joy-Con controller is if I'm like at a family member's house or if I'm going out somewhere on like vacation, for example, and if I'm just bored out of my mind, I'll be like, oh hey, I'll just bring my Nintendo Switch and I'll use the little Joy-Cons there. So if I'm like in a car ride on my way to the airport or if I'm just traveling in general even, I'll use the Joy-Con controllers then, but I prefer the Pro controllers over the Joy-Con controllers because Pro controllers function far better than the Joy-Cons because the Joy-Cons they just suck. Especially because if you got like dust or some crumbs or whatever inside the little Joy-Con, then you're going to get stick drift much easier and it's going to make playing video games with the Joy-Con controllers much more difficult and painful. So, yeah, it's just not that good. But it looks like for the Switch 2, it looks like there's some kind of, I guess, rubber banding around the Joy-Con, so it's, I guess, more protected that way so you don't get stick drift. But even then, like, I still have questions for that, but I'll talk about that later. My next concern for the Switch 2 is gonna be a big one, like the storage size, okay? So we all know on the original Nintendo Switch, it can hold up to like what, 32 gigabytes, maybe like 31 gigabytes, and then the Switch Lite I think had similar size storage, and then the Switch OLED had I believe 64 gigabytes of storage, so you could store more games on there than the original Switch. So that's my biggest issue going forward, especially because we have so many games coming out that are starting to become higher quality and in terms of like I guess graphics and gameplay wise, like we need to keep an eye on the storage because when games like Dying Light, for example, came over to the Nintendo Switch,
they obviously had to do some kind of compressing in terms of like file size, because there are some games that are ported onto the Nintendo Switch that need to have their file size reduced. So, just want to get that one out of the way. Especially with games like Star Wars Battlefront the Classic Collection, even. I'm pretty sure they had to do some things to that game for the Switch port. But even then, man, like, it makes me think. I wonder how much storage the Switch 2 is gonna have. Is it gonna have like 64 gigabytes? Is it gonna have 32 gigabytes, same as the original Switch? Because last time I checked, on the original Switch, Switch Lite, and the Switch OLED, there was like a little memory card slot that you can use. You could use, like, I think some kind of SD card, or you could use like a Lexar Play card, memory card, and you can slot that into the back of your Nintendo Switch where the kickstand usually is, and you can slot that memory card in, and you get more storage. Now, personally, I have a Lexar Play card for my Nintendo Switch OLED, so that's like worth, I believe, 1 terabyte of storage. So I'm basically set for the Nintendo Switch's life cycle up until the Switch 2 comes out. And with the storage in mind, you gotta ask yourself this: will we be able to hold more games or less games on the Switch 2? Because 32 gigabytes, if you think about it, for the Nintendo Switch, for the base Switch, that's not a lot of storage compared to like the PS5 or the Xbox Series X or S, for example. 32 gigabytes is not that much. I mean, same thing with the Switch OLED, even. I mean, 64 gigabytes, that is a lot more than the original Switch, but 64 gigabytes is it's still pretty low in my opinion. The next question I have for the Nintendo Switch 2 is backwards compatibility. Because if you think about it, backwards compatibility, at least in my opinion, it's starting to become more of a requirement going forward with video games. Because games on the PS4 are backwards compatible on the PS5, and some games on like the Xbox 360 and Xbox One are backwards compatible on the Xbox Series X and S. Games like Black Ops 2, for example, on the Xbox Series X and S can be backwards compatible with the Xbox 360. And games like, I guess, God of War or Elden Ring on the PS4, for example, can be backwards compatible on the PS5. So, same thing with like Nintendo Switch. It makes me think, like, are there going to be Nintendo Switch games like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or Super Smash Bros. Ultimate? Will they be backwards compatible on the Switch 2? And if it's not going to be backwards compatible, then that's going to be a massive issue for a lot of people, especially for the sake of video game preservation. So, with most of these concerns that I have out of the way, I think the last concern I do have is the pricing. Because, especially in today's economy where everything is just really, really expensive, it makes me worried. Like, how much will the Nintendo Switch 2 cost? Will it be more expensive than the original Switch, or will it be less expensive? Probably not. And I think if we're going to talk about how expensive it might be, if I were to take like a wild estimated guess, I would probably say maybe it might be around maybe $400, maybe even more, which I think is absolutely still pretty crazy. But then again, if we talk about consoles like the Xbox or like the PS5 and compare that to like the original Switch, because the PS5 is like what, $600, $700, and like the Xbox Series X and S is like around $500 to like $600 maybe, which is very expensive. So it makes me think, like, can some people even simply afford the Nintendo Switch 2 because of how much these companies are demanding for these consoles, like it makes me very worried. Like, will some people even be able to buy a Nintendo Switch or the Switch 2 even?
But other than that, I mean, that's basically all I got for concerns for the Switch 2. I mean, the only, I guess, last concern I do have is will it actually be successful to its predecessor, the original Switch, or will it end up being a flop just like the Wii U? Because this is what I remember. Back when Nintendo first released the Nintendo Wii console, that helped revolutionize video games in a lot of ways. And after the success of the Nintendo Wii, I remember Nintendo released the Wii U console, and a lot of people weren't really that interested in the Wii U console, and that ended up being as Nintendo's worst selling console of all time. So it makes me think. I wonder if the Nintendo Switch 2 is basically going to end up like another Wii U situation. I mean, the Nintendo Switch was a massive success for Nintendo, don't get me wrong. It outsold the Xbox 360 in lifetime sales. But it makes me think, will the Switch 2 either be a success or will it just end up as a flop and we could get another Wii U situation on our hand? But at this point, I suppose only time will tell, and it's up to Nintendo to actually deliver on their Switch 2. And if it's successful, great. People are going to be happy. But if it's going to be a disappointment, then it sucks for Nintendo. Now, I get it. The way that I see the Switch 2, it does look like a bit of a copy and paste, meaning like, oh, hey, this is just basically another version of the Switch. Why would I want to waste my money on this when I can just get a PS5 or save up for a PC or an Xbox? You know what I'm saying? I get that. I can understand from that perspective, but at the same time, I'm willing to keep an open mind and be hopeful going forward because this is going to be Nintendo's next gen console, whether we like it or not. Hopefully, it ends up good. I want it to be good because I'm a big fan of Nintendo. I love their games. I grew up with Nintendo games. And I will admit, this does look like the exact same thing as the original Switch, but hopefully it's an upgraded version from the Switch OLED and the original Switch. And I hope we can get much better games on there than we do currently have right now for the original Switch. So, as of now, we're just going to have to wait and see what Nintendo does with the Switch 2, and we're just going to have to play the waiting game on this one. And it's up to Nintendo to deliver to see if it's actually worth all the attention or not. So, with this being said, thank you everyone for watching and for listening. And until next time, I'm talking about the Nintendo Switch 2, and I'll see you all later.